Welcome to First Dates and Soulmates. I'm your host, Nikki Meg.
And I'm Meg Casebolt. It is
We
the
just
40th
ripped
episode,
that.
and I will have just turned 41 by the time this goes live.
Ooh, yes, Meg. I am in my late 30s now, which is different. I'm going to be 6. I'm like, yeah, do you know how old I'm going to be? He goes, you're going to be 38. I went, no, I'm not. And then I paused and went, oh, God.
Oh, I am.
And mentally, I'm still 35, 36. Like, that's interesting. That's interesting. As time progresses, which is sad. Meg and I are both fellow February babies.
We
I am
are
on the 6th.
hard Aquariuses.
Yes. Do you know like your moon and your rising?
Ooh, I've looked
know
it up,
it.
but I can never remember.
I think it's like a Taurus moon and a Gemini rising, and I don't really know what it means, but I remember when I copy and pasted the star chart and the descriptions, I can book it.
Yeah,
Makes
I
sense to me.
I don't buy into it that much. I do a lot of like personality tests and assessments,
Mhm.
but like I don't necessarily buy into the time that you were born impacts your future. I don't know.
I think it's always fun to read them. But what about like for your birthday? Like, are you a big birthday celebrator? You know, we're recording this before our birthday, so I have no idea what either of us are going to be doing for our birthday. But like, are you a birthday person? Like, do you celebrate? Is there cake? Do you go out? Or are you like low chill?
I think
For your
I
birthday?
used to be a much bigger birthday celebrator. I
Mm.
actually have another friend. She and I worked together at our like first jobs out of college, and she has the same birthday as you. So if Michelle is listening, hey Michelle, happy birthday.
Birthday twin.
And so she and I did like joint birthday parties when we were in our 20s. So we lived in Boston and we'd go out and do karaoke, of course.
Love it.
And like ice skating, or not ice skating. We did roller skating because ice skating on these ankles, not a good choice. I can't hold myself upright. It's fine. But you know, like we did it together. Same with like my first grade best friend had the same birthday as me, so we did joint birthday parties. So I feel like in the same way that I love a good collaboration, I don't always like all of the attention on me, but I like to celebrate birthdays. So I'm glad that you and I have our birthday episode together.
I love that.
But then I feel like with like having kids and COVID, like I sort of got out of the habit of big birthdays. So maybe I should get back into it this year. Maybe this is the start of something new. And at 40 last year, my girlfriends and I all went on like, we went to Florida and did like a whole long weekend together. So yeah, what about you? Big birthdays?
Really, I like being the center of attention.
Surprise.
Is anybody surprised? I love it, but I've never really had good luck with birthdays. Like, not to turn this into like a discussion of my trauma. This is not traumatic. It's just, it was hard. I was one of those people that like, I invited a bunch of people to my birthday party and nobody showed up. But I think what made this worse is I was not a child. I was like 22.
Oh.
Yeah. So like every time now I do anything like where I invite people, I still have that thing where like, I don't think people are going to show up. And it sucked. So, so I try to be like really chill with it. This whole idea of like, if I don't do it, then obviously it won't go badly. But like, I love surprise parties. Like one of my favorite birthdays when I was like, I think I was 16 and my parents were away because there was an annual conference they used to go to that was always like around my birthday. So they weren't often home for the actual date. And I remember like, this would have been sometime between 1998 and 2004 because I remember where I was living at the point. But did you ever play like that online game, Gaia Online?
No.
I don't even really remember what it was, but like you had an avatar and like you would go on and like your friends could also be online. This was back in the day, dial up, and we only had one, you have 2 phone lines in your house. You're very fancy. But I remember like I was online playing this game and none of my friends were online. I was like, where is everybody? All of a sudden my doorbell rings and it was my best friends with a limo driver. And my parents had arranged for them to get picked up by this limo company that we knew and come to my house, pick me up. We went to the Mandarin buffet, and it was this big Mandarin buffet that's literally like the size of a warehouse. And they have like themed rooms, like this is the aquarium room, and this ate so much food. And then they came back to my house for a sleepover. And I remember this because we listened to the new MSI album, like Mindless Self-Indulgence, because we were really into like harder alt rock at the top of our lungs in this limo on the way to this Mandarin Chinese buffet. Still one of my favorite birthday parties ever.
Oh my God, that's incredible.
So I think it's pretty fun. It will be interesting. Again, we're about a month out, less than a month out from both of our birthdays at the time of this recording. I'm actually going to be in Canada for my birthday for the first time in about 6 years. I'm normally away. I go to Florida in the winters, and I'm there for my birthday. So it's usually like dinner out with my parents and their friends. But I'm actually going to be home this year, which is why I've already reached out to people. And I'm like, I feel like I should do something. What are we going to do? I haven't decided yet. So perhaps in a future episode, I will report back on.
But a month of notice definitely helps with people trying to make plans.
True, especially now that people have things like kids and jobs, and not everybody has a flexible schedule. Some people work 9 to 5. So, but we love birthdays. So for our birthday episode, we decided to kind of harken back to our kind of like romance books Reddit episode that we did with Andrea Jones a couple months ago, and kind of just like, let's just ask each other silly questions, stupid questions, thought-provoking questions related to this genre that we love so much. So I feel like this episode is just going to be the most beautiful, random, weird thoughts ever. And I'm so excited to do this.
I threw it all on you, all of the prep. So I am going into this completely blind, which is so fun for me because I'm not gonna be prepared, and that's exciting for me.
Okay, this is improv. We are working, like, we're stretching our improvisation muscles where it's just yes and all over the place. All right, I'm excited. Are you ready?
I am ready. Shoot me your first question. I have the list, but I won't look at it until it's my turn to ask, and then I'll take
There you go. Meg, if you had to plan the perfect grand gesture for your fictional love interest, what are you doing?
I feel like so much of the grand gesture is it needs to be related to the couple and the conflict that is inherent in that. So it's really hard to say without having the entire plot of the book, outlined and figured out. But I do love like a big either concert scenario, if it's like a really true grand gesture, not just like the two of them getting back together, but like a really true grand gesture. I feel like there's something about like there's an Eiffel Tower.
What? Could be in Paris, could be in Vegas.
Right.
You just need to get a Lego Eiffel Tower in the background. Like you just need to have an Eiffel Tower.
You need like a
the phallic symbol is good luck. There it is.
It looks like a tingly award.
There you go.
But like some sort of big landmark. I don't know that I would necessarily want like a big proposal or like flash mob, because I feel like anytime that you're putting someone on the spot, that can be awkward. But I love like Sleepless in Seattle, where they meet at the Empire State Building. So I think for me, it would be based around the setting of, somebody they put out and they say, meet me at the top of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, even or in the Paris Hotel in Las Vegas, right? Like they say that they're going to meet there. And one person is waiting for the other to arrive, and they get delayed, and then you get like we were talking about with Meet Me Next Christmas, where it's like you run into the theater and
you're always late, even though this date and time for this concert has been chosen for over a year. You're still late.
You're still late. You still get stuck in traffic. Come on, you don't need all the anyway. So I think for me, it would be very setting based on what's important to the couple, but it would need to be some sort of large landmark. Maybe at the top of, I don't know, the arch in St. Louis, if that's, what's Meet Me in St. Louis? Is that another Christmas movie?
I know it's a Judy Garland.
Yeah, the Judy Garland movie.
I've never watched it. I have no idea.
It's Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas was from Meet Me in St. Louis.
Well, perhaps it is a Christmas movie.
Okay, I've never seen it. Maybe maybe next year we can watch like old school. We can go back in and do like It's a Wonderful Life and break it down, rewrite it as a romance novel instead of like a depressed dude. There we go. There's my reenactment retelling for next year. Nikki, what about you? What would be your big grand gesture moment?
I would never plan a grand gesture because I hate grand gestures. Although you did bring up a good point, this idea that a grand gesture doesn't have to necessarily be in a crowd. I would never involve other people in my grand gesture. Like proposals in public, on the Jumbotron. What is that movie? Justin Timberlake, Mila Kunis, Friends with Benefits.
Yes.
Just No Strings Attached with Natalie Portman, Ashton Kutcher. When he does the big flash mob in Grand Central Station at the end of it, and even as they're poking fun at the whole fact, like, look, it's a flash mob. Isn't this dumb? I was like, no, none of this. If you involve other people in your grand gesture, I hate it so much because, one, you're involving other people and I'm annoyed. But two, it's so much pressure on the other person.
And the recipient of the grand gesture.
Exactly. To like, do they help you save face or are they worried? And then as you were talking, I was like, well, maybe if the grand gesture was something like, I turned down the job in London staying with you, and they, they come running to your house and said, I don't go. I feel like that would also put too much pressure on me as the recipient to be like, you just made this huge decision about your life that didn't really involve me. And I'm happy you feel good about that. But now I feel like a lot of pressure to be like so okay with this. And I don't know if I would be. So I find grand gestures very problematic. The gesture I would appreciate though,
As the
is
recipient.
as the recipient, if someone was doing unto me a grand gesture, would just be that they had planned something
Yeah.
for us to do together.
Could
And
just be a nice dinner. It's not grand. It's a
exactly.
gesture, right?
I just had to show up, and I didn't have to think about it.
Yeah.
For me, like, that would be, like, the ultimate
It's a
gesture. I don't like
thoughtful
grand
gesture.
gestures. Thoughtful gesture, thank you. I feel like that is the differentiation. Grand gestures freak me out, make me nervous. I feel like there's pressure, but something intentional, something thoughtful, I'm all in on that one.
Yeah, to your point, like, when I first wrote the draft of Peppermint Bark that I sent to my sensitivity reader and my developmental editor, Sydney, it had a big grand gesture. He buys her a house, right? And Sydney was like, there's not enough agency and consent happening here. So we rewrote it. So it was he negotiates the lease of the house for her so that way she can become a foster parent in this house that she loves. And he's like, I'll get my own apartment, right?
I like that.
You know?
I like that.
And so I wrote the grand gesture and then I backtracked the grand gesture so as not to put Grace in a situation where she had to react to it in the moment. But I always write the grand gesture to be big, and then I have to go like, okay, how's this other person going to react to? Is this an appropriate grand gesture for the scale at which the plot is happening? You know, I write bigger scale problems. I'm not a low angst writer. I'm like a break them up and make them cry writer.
Yes, you are.
So there's something there about like the scale of the conflict has to match the scale of the gesture. But if I were to write something low angst, it could be, just come over for dinner. And I've read those and they're great, but you need the gesture to match the scale of conflict.
It's true. Don't
all right.
other people in your bullshit.
I am going to ask you now. I'm just looking at your list for the first time. What's your favorite cringeworthy pet name?
Oh, I don't like pet names generally speaking. I do like a babe type of deal. If it's something fun, like, when they, especially if the person has a southern accent and they call you darling, I'm like, I kind of like that. For me, I think pet names can be kind of fun when they are deliberately stupid and both people in the relationship are totally on board with the stupidity of it. Like Pookie. It's a dumbass name and I would hate it. But if I had a partner and we kind of agreed that like, part of our shtick is coming up with stupid names, that would be really fun. I would kind of be into that. But pet names in general, I don't know. It's just I like babe. I like baby. Generally speaking, because I just think it's like so easy to say. What are other like one syllable pet names? Maybe it's the brevity of the pet name that I appreciate.
There's a moment where love,
I don't like
love
fun,
becomes a pet name, and sometimes as a writer you can be like, he's starting to say love, but is it just a term of endearment, or is there something bigger behind it, which I do love.
True. Especially if they spell it LUV and it's said in some sort of UK accent. Or like Jack Sparrow-esque. Kind of how they throw that in the end, like, how you doing, love? I'm like, oh, yes. Somebody called me honey last week and it was a server. And it's not, it wasn't a pet name. But I immediately get my backup when names like that are used. Because it makes me so uncomfortable. I'm like, bitch, you don't know me.
I think there's also like, there's a way that you can write a pet name into a scene where it is a moment of connection that then you can harken back to. So I'm thinking about like the Drake Security series where each of those couples, the dragon has a pet name for their mate. And so it's like Treasure because they have the hoard and they care about it, or Bijou, like French for Jewel. But there's also a part of me every time, especially when they show up in later books in the series and they're like, come on, Treasure. And I'm like, oh, come on.
Maybe the fact I think too, I kind of like it maybe when they're in another language. that's not my native one. Because I was thinking, Psycho, Onley James, August
Yes.
and Lucas's book. At the end, they kind of have a negotiation thing because they had jokingly been calling each other professor earlier on, and Lucas says to August at the end, like, "I do not call me professor. Like, I don't like it." And August proposes it's in Russian, so I'm going to say it wrong, but like Unishka, this idea, and it kind of, and Lucas is like, "Oh, interesting. Like, what is that?" It's something along like a teacher would say it to a student, kind of like, "Oh, you're my smart little student," and they use that then as a pet name. And I was like, I actually really like that.
I like
Maybe it's
that.
also the fact that it needs to be not English, like as a native English speaker. Because like Bijou actually sounds to me like cute. I like Bijou. But if he were to call me Jewel, I'd be like, what the fuck is this nonsense? Like, no.
Or it's
Or,
sort of like,
I like Bijou. I like Miss.
okay,
Whatever. I'm like, give me like, or even actually like Tesor or Tesoro.
Mhm.
Actually, I could deal with that. Yeah.
Okay, so you need
Give
some
me
sort of language
cute,
barrier to make it sound
non-English
okay.
nickname.
Because
That's my
same thing in that same series with Asa and Ava calling their partners Lois and Kitten. I'm like, okay,
I do
good
like
once,
Lois.
but then over the course of the series, I'm like, now they're just throwing in Lois and Kitten and it's not explained. And I'm like, why the hell is he calling him Lois? Like, if I hadn't read the whole series.
Yeah.
So that bothers me. And then also I read Kate Canterbary's series. It's a family in Boston and they all own the Walsh family. They all own an architecture firm together. And they at the end of the series to tie it up, I know a lot of series do this where like they have every single couple has a chapter where they're all together for the holidays. And it was almost like she was shoving like, oh, hey, Commando, hey, Turtle, hey, all these like cutesy little nicknames. And I'm like, if I forgot that they called each other that because I read the
Yeah.
book 2 and this is now book 7. And I was like, it just
Mhm.
felt forced. But it also harkens back to like what is interesting about this couple. So I don't always like a babe. I want it to be something a little more interesting.
Yeah, I just with that, I feel like my thing with pet names too is they're kind of meant for just you because
Yeah.
they're relating to a part of your relationship or an emotion that you guys have. So going to like a big dinner, like a family dinner, and having everybody call each other publicly, no, thank
It's
you.
weird.
It's again, it's you're making me party to your gestures, and I'm not into being an accomplice. I don't want to be accomplishing in this.
That's fair.
But it is kind of sometimes it can be funny though, like with it's Asa and Abby with Zane and Felix calling them Lois and Kitten respectively. I do like sometimes with that family that other siblings will adopt the nicknames when they want to be snarky and a little bit bitchy.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing, Lois? And Asa just looks at him and goes, "Excuse me, like
You're
that's
not allowed.
my name.
Only
for
I can
Zane.
call him Lois.
Only I can
Yeah.
use that." So I kind of like that. Yeah, I kind of like that with pet names. It's just like, no, that's our thing. You're not, you don't get to participate in this. This is not a you thing. This is an us thing. Mm. Do you have a pet name type situation with like your husband or like even your kids? I find sometimes with kids, you have like a quote unquote pet name. It's kind of like a nickname. Like,
Yeah.
do you have that in
Ben
your
and
family?
Ben and I make fun of other people for saying babe too often.
Yeah.
So it's very much a like if he's being kind of snarky to be like, okay, babe, like it's that way, but it's not something that I would call him unironically.
Mhm.
But my kids, it's all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if I say their names so much as I'm like, okay, kiddo, buddy,
Mhm.
honey. Sometimes I call them babe or baby, just when I'm like, okay, baby, let's go. And
Mhm.
they're used to it.
Yeah.
The older one has started to put down some like, don't call me that one. I'm like, okay.
Cool.
And I'll even ask them like, which do you prefer? Would you rather be this or this? Okay, little one. And sometimes the little one will be like, Mom, call me little one now. And I'm like, okay.
Aw,
So
that's
they
cute.
have their preferences, which I try to support.
Oh, really?
I know.
Yeah. Okay. Just because we were talking about the Necessary Evil series, here's my next question. Okay, so picture a world
Okay.
where you are the villain in
Oh.
a romance novel.
Oh.
What is your motivation and how do you get in the couple's way?
You have
Right?
an answer to this while I think about it?
Yeah, generally speaking, like if I was a villain, I feel like I would have to be like a super villain. Like I'm not just like a bitchy boss or, like that type of villain. I'm like, no, I am like trying to take over the city. I am like fucking up infrastructure. I'm trying to revolutionize the government and bureaucratic system of the city. So like that's the level of villain I'm at. So my main motivation is I hate the decisions that everybody else is making, and really I'm smarter and make the decision. So that's my motivation. So if there was like a couple that was like living in this town in which I've tried to revolutionize the bureaucratic system with color-coded spreadsheets and better decision making, I feel like I would want to get in their way in like really petty ways. Like, oh, you're trying to get married? I'm so sorry. The marriage license bureau is closed this week. Can't get your paperwork. Or, oh, like you need to, book an appointment to get blood tests done in whatever states require blood tests before marriage. I'm so sorry. We're out of needles. Like that's how I would fuck with them in like those little annoying ways. It's not going to be like I kidnap you and tie you to train tracks. It's not going to be, I put you in jail on false charges. No, I'm going to fuck with you in small, annoying ways that you're like, for them to solve it would take so many phone calls and so many strongly written emails. They probably just give up. And that's how I would be the villain.
You're the red tape villain.
Yes. Oh my God. Can that be my name? Like red tape. And I would have a red cape made out of red tape. Oh my God. And then I would have like an outfit that was just like made like paperwork. Like this is document C52B. And it would just be like a patchwork pastiche bureaucratic paperwork, and I would be red tape.
I love this for you.
This is my villain origin story.
I think the villainous the villainous action that I would take. We just did our episode with Kay Sterling a couple weeks ago, and so I read Jonathan All Along, and the villain in that story is the executive assistant who it keeps apart the couple, right? But she's
for their own good.
What she believes is their own good because she thinks that they're just a fling. She doesn't realize how serious they are, and she thinks that like basically the entire country of Austria will fall apart if they're together, in her opinion. And so she thinks she's doing the right thing, and she's very carefully and supportively manipulative. And I think that's the kind of villain that I would be, is like very insular, very much like, oh no, he didn't call. I guess he doesn't care about you as much as I thought he did, like,
and like give them the wrong phone number, wrong email address. You're hiding letters in like a secret box in a closet.
I totally would be.
Oh.
And like that, actually, I don't know how accurate this is because my grandmother passed away like 15, 20 years ago. But I believe that her marrying my grandfather was a move of spite because her mother, she told me, like when she was in the nursing home, she told me the story about how she got letters from other gentlemen. And her mother hid them because she didn't think they were good enough. And then my grandfather just came to the door and she was like out of spite. Like he wasn't good enough for her. But Dorothy had her reasons. She just wanted to get back at her mom, and like there's something really like that, hiding the letters and holding back and people react in that way. Like that's really a cool story.
I love all of that because like, again, I think our thing is like, we just want like, it's the subtle manipulations. I think are way more villainous rather than I'm going to blow up something, whatever. It's when you're stuck in a system that you can't fight back against, the ultimate villainy in the world.
With my 10-year-old right now, he's reading the Harry Potter series. And I have thoughts about Harry Potter now, but we won't go into those. But we were trying to explain to him last night on the drive to swim practice the difference between a villain and an antagonist.
Interesting, yeah.
Where like Voldemort is the villain of the whole series, but Draco is the antagonist and sometimes the villain, right? But not always, because he's a much more complicated character. And what are his motivations and how is he pushing against Harry's goals? And like we had this really fascinating conversation about like rewriting, because oh my God, Nikki, you're going to be so excited about this. He's starting to write fanfic.
Oh my God, yes, I love this for him.
He sat down the other day and started at my computer writing, my name is Malfoy, Draco Malfoy. And I'm like, yeah,
oh my God,
like,
I love it.
Let's walk through the series, but make Draco the protagonist and Harry is the antagonist. And maybe the villain, but also the villain is still Voldemort, but also not. Like, so we're exploring these terms in our house in a really beautiful way. But that's what I initially thought of when you asked this question about being the villain.
I like that too.
Wouldn't it be interesting to rewrite Harry Potter from the perspective of Voldemort, where he keeps, and Harry Potter is the villain, Because
Yeah,
Voldemort honestly has the clearest character arc. He has the
Mhm.
goal of getting back into power. Like, wouldn't that be a fascinating story to read?
Yeah, one of my favorite podcasts is The Villain Was Right. It's hosted by Craig Faye and Rebecca Reeds.
Love
And
this.
their whole shtick is like they look at movies and TV shows from the villain's perspective and dare to ask, were they really all that wrong? But their definition of a villain is the person or people or organization stopping the main character from getting what they.
Mm.
And one of the very first episodes they did was the Baroness in The Sound of Music,
Oh, wow.
which was fascinating. And then obviously they go through like all sorts of movies and TV shows, and some of them are very silly, and some of them are like very, very true. But it's just a really funny, I think, way, yeah, to look at it is that a villain doesn't necessarily have to be like a twirling their mustache type of villain. It's just something that's stopping the main character from getting what they want. They recently did an episode, I'm just looking it up here, on like Raise Your Voice, the Hilary Duff movie, which is one of my favorite hate watches, and it's so funny. They also did an episode on Hot Frosty, which is
Oh,
that
God.
Netflix movie with the snowman that comes to life. I'm just telling you, if you want to look at some villainous content, definitely check out The Villain Was Right. It's very, but I digress.
All right. Back to our questions.
Yeah.
What is a trope that you're totally over?
That I'm totally over. Like fake dating and fake, like fake marriage of convenience type deal. Like it wasn't probably one of my favorites to do, but now I find that these scenarios for those storylines are kind of getting more and more either too ridiculous, or it's like just have a conversation, just hire a lawyer, just whatever. Like there's no need for this. I think perhaps it's because one of my themes for this year is this idea of enforcing boundaries. And for me, a lot of times fake dating or fake marriage comes in because someone's family is being like, why aren't you married yet? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? Or they have to do it for work. And I just want that character to stand up and say, like, get the fuck out of my life. It's none of your damn business. So I think that's why it's hard for me now to just kind of read those stories, because I'm like, if that's happening in your life, then what are you doing to fix it? Why is this the easiest solution for you? To bring another person into your bullshit, like grand gestures. Don't bring other people into your shit. So yeah, I'm probably done for now. Of course, I'll probably read it again later with like the whole dating marriage to solve a problem. Like, have a fucking conversation. I just don't have to.
I feel the same way about fake dating, because I feel like often it's a Band-Aid answer to get a trope in there that people are familiar with. So from a marketing perspective, fake dating is very popular. But for me as the reader, I actually don't mind marriage of convenience because I feel like the stakes are so much higher. And fake dating, so often as a structure, they meet or they've known each other for a while, they start dating, they slowly fall in love, but then the conflict, especially at that halfway point, is like, oh, I'm starting to grow feelings. And now I want to be committed, but I don't know if they feel the same way. Versus marriage of convenience, the commitment happens in the first 10% typically. And I like that they're forced. It's almost like a mini forced proximity. It's not the location-based forced proximity, but you have to figure it out. The commitment is there earlier. And then when they start to develop feelings, it's almost like, wait, but we're already in it.
Yeah.
And I like that shift more than fake dating for some sort of external conflict resolution. So that's me. I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, that brings up another fun question that I found is, what is the most ridiculous excuse for forced proximity you've ever read? Or if you can't think of one you've read, what is the most ridiculous one you could come up with?
I just wrote a scene in my new book where they get trapped in an elevator, and it is the most fun that I've had writing in a long time. One of them is claustrophobic. No, clethiophobic, which is the fear of being trapped in a small space. So it's not even claustrophobic. It's the trappedness of it. And it is one of my favorite scenes I've ever written, because they end up doing self-defense together. Like it's
in the elevator
they start playing truth or dare to distract themselves, and then it turns into a self-defense lesson, and then it turns into a makeout session, and it's just so much fun. And I have a couple friends who are writers, and I did not intend for this to be the case, but I have said to them, if you're feeling stuck about how your characters feel about each other, shove them in an elevator. Because there's so much give and take. There's so much
Mhm.
push pull when you are in a 3x5 container with a person
Mhm.
for an indefinite amount of time. And it's like, what are you gonna do to pass that time together? You have
Mhm.
you can shut it down. Like I read say with the Walsh series, there's one that
Mhm.
starts that way. That's their meet cute. Is he is an architect going to a building to check something out. She lives in the building. They get stuck in the elevator together. They listen to music together. He has to check his insulin pump. Like they
Mhm.
have, but you're forced to be in that relationship with each other, whether you like it or not.
Mhm.
And that's a really interesting way to play with it. Kate Daniels has this amazing forced proximity. It's not with the person that she's in relationship with. It's with an antagonist where they are trapped in a cage with water along the bottom of it. It's Kate is a human, and then she's trapped with a vampire, and they have to keep each other alive. But if you fall into the water, you could drown. So they have to like hold themselves up and hold each other up. And it's a really interesting way to like you think you're gonna die.
That freaks me out. The whole elevator thing freaks me out too because a couple years ago in Toronto, we had like a lot of flooding.
Mm.
And there was a story about these people who got stuck in an elevator in a parking garage and they got rescued when the water and they were like 9 inches from the elevator.
Oh God.
Because like you can't get out of elevators. People think there's like the flap on the end. It's like, no, that's meant for
No.
people to get into it, not for you to get out. So now every time I think of elevators, like, oh no, we're immediately gonna die. None of this is
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. You and Cruz have that in common, whereas Victoria has like so much knowledge of how buildings are constructed that she's like, no, 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 you can't actually fall. There's 6 to 12 cables above us that are all capable.
Mhm.
Like she has all this
Mhm.
knowledge that like
Yeah.
reassures her. Anyway, what about you? Forced proximity
I think
situation.
the weirdest one I've read, and this is so long ago, so I don't really remember the full plot, but it involved jail. Like the two characters got arrested for very two different, like one was
I
like a
love
drunk and
this.
disorderly, and one was a something else. I don't really remember. But they were in like side by side prison cells at like the local police, whatever. And then, like, they were there for like, it was a weekend and they couldn't get bail and set until, like, Monday, so they were just in side by side cells over the weekend and, like, "Oh my god, we're in love." Weirdest thing I've ever read, and so, like, I guess what an excuse because they literally can't get out of there. Um, yeah, that was probably the weirdest one I've ever read, like, let's get arrested for I think it was, like, one of them was drunk and disorderly because of a breakup, and I think the other one, like, keyed their ex's car. So they were kind of like starting to talk about how, oh my God, my ex and each of them and kind of commiserating over that. And then they got together at the end of it. It was very weird.
That's a weird one.
Uh, yeah, prison's a weird kind of meet cute forced proximity.
Okay, let's go to like a less dark place.
Yeah.
You, my friend,
Mm,
are a small town baker.
okay.
What's the flavor of cupcake that wins over your love interest?
I'm a basic bitch when it comes to cupcakes. I like vanilla. Like if it's a really good vanilla, I like vanilla ice cream. I like vanilla cupcakes. I like vanilla. But if I was gonna win somebody over, I feel like it would have to be like lemon because I feel like lemon is super hard to get
Mm.
right and have it be like really light. So I feel like I would win them over by showing my excellent finessed baking skill in presenting this most beautiful, like perfect fresh lemon cupcake, as opposed to how fucking bonkers can I get like a chocolate cupcake stuffed with cookie dough and has like a mountain of sprinkles on it, and it's served with a scoop of ice cream, and also it's in like a cloth with like nitrogen gas that gets like
Like
released
a
when they eat it.
trifle. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like we're not doing that. I feel like it would be a nice, perfect, delicate lemon cupcake. That would be. Would you be like a small time baker? Like, would you make a cupcake that had like a flavor that would win someone over, or would you rather go like just assorted pastries and cakes?
Okay, so when I saw this question, the first thing that came to mind is for Christmas, I found this local nut business.
Okay.
They do small roast batches of nuts where they do
Mm-hmm.
some flavor plus some alcohol extract.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that idea for cupcakes. So I just went and looked them up.
Mm-hmm.
They have some that aren't alcohol, pumpkin spice cashews and
Mm-hmm.
salted caramel cashews. But I got my mom these vanilla rum cashews for Christmas, and they are extraordinary. So I feel like for me, if I were a small town baker, which I would never do, here are some of those lists of like the combinations of
Mhm.
vanilla rum, maple bourbon almonds, cinnamon whiskey pecan, some of those like just a little bit of extra flavor to them. I could see a really interesting meet cute happening. I'm not sure I would love to write it. Of they just have the cupcakes out with the alcoholic components in it, and then there's somebody
Mhm.
who is sober who doesn't know that there's an alcoholic component to it, and is it the
Mhm.
flavor or does it throw off their sobriety? Like, I feel like that would be a really interesting meet cute
That
of,
would be fascinating.
you know, if you're eating a vanilla rum or maple bourbon and you're not getting drunk from it, it's just a flavor palette, like, would that
Mhm.
satisfy an itch that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise? Or would it be a problem to have somebody who's doing that? I don't know, because you do see sometimes, like, a sober character with a bartender,
Mhm.
as a way to create some conflict. But small town baker, that's where my head went, is I would have my vanilla rum cupcake
You
and
got
see
some
how that
boozy cupcakes.
boozy cupcakes.
Boozy flavored cupcakes. I like that. Because we just talked about small town baker. So picture the worst possible career for a romance hero, heroine, main character,
Mm.
and how it leads to romantic chaos. Because I think we've talked about this in previous episodes. Often, romantic heroines have romance girl jobs. They work in publishing, they're a baker, they work in a flower shop. Like they have very girl coded jobs. So, what do you think is the worst possible career and how it would lead to constant chaos?
Um, I'm gonna take this from the direct context of my life,
Mm,
which is, when I met my husband, he was in the Navy, in the United States Navy, in the nuclear program. And so I met him after he went to shore duty, but before we met, he was, stationed on a submarine.
ooh,
When you're on a sub, you are out, not just like out deployed for 3
mhm,
months, but you are completely out of communication
mm,
for 3 months. And so I would love to see from a logistical and like your time is not your own, your location is not your own, you make
mhm.
no decisions, you have these super long days. Um, and there's a joke in the Navy that, if you have kids, you can either be there for the conception or the delivery. So I think it would be really interesting to have like a one night stand situation, and then he goes underway and he's gone.
Mhm,
And when he comes back, you have this question of like, what do you do? Like secret
mhm.
pregnancy? It's not my favorite trope, but that to me would be the boring, difficult job, especially when you're on the boat and after when you're in that division,
Mhm.
you're on rotating shift work.
Oh god. That sounds
So
miserable for
it's
so many
completely miserable.
reasons.
So
Also, it's you're trapped in a tube underwater, which sounds like my nightmare. You
it's
couldn't even get me to go into a sub above water. Like
yeah.
I would immediately start crying. No thank
Ben is
you.
6'3", and, like, his bed was not tall enough for him. The showers were not
Six.
tall enough for him.
Oh
There's a
my god.
reason he got out.
That sounds horrifying.
But, like,
No
even
thank
when we
you.
met, like, we met on his 4-day weekend, and then he did, 7 days of days, and then we had our first date when he was
Mhm.
transitioning from days to nights, and
Oh
so,
god.
like, like, it was 36 hours that he came to it was bananas. It was terrible. It was terrible for dating when you're on rotating shift work. So, um yeah, no, thank you. What about you?
Mhm.
Worst career?
Yeah, initially my brain went to something like, oh, they work as like a garbage truck driver or a
Mm,
plumber, like some job where it's blue collar, it's dirty, it's very physical. So they're always running late to dates and there's always like a smell and other people judge them for it. That's kind of where my brain first went to. It's just something around probably more of like the blue collar side. But I think there's also something when I think about worst possible career that leads to chaos in the plot. I feel like they would just have to have a fucking dumb career. Like,
mm.
and this is no judgment on this job, but like they're a carnival psychic.
That would be amazing.
Like it would just be so random and like how does that fit into someone's dating life when you're, just like this really personal assistant would be a horrible. We look. What's that movie with Zoe Deutsch and Glenn Powell? Set where there are two executive assistants. It's fantastic. It's on Netflix. It's an amazing movie. They're both transcendent in that. But Zoe Deutsch works for like Lucy Liu's character as a PA, and Glenn Powell works for Tay Diggs. and they have very demanding bosses, and they work in the same building. So they decide to kind of like Cyrano de Bergerac two bosses
Love
so
it.
they can have free time. Endlessly charming. It's beautiful. But they don't get to really date or have personal lives. Like Zoe Deutsch's character goes on dates with men and she's constantly late or having to cancel dates because of her job. Glenn Powell is dating like this model and he's always showing up late. She wants somebody with more cachet than him. So I also feel like if you're in what people would see as like a menial job, there would also be some like chaos associated with that because it's not, you don't get to control your schedule like in the army. So when do you date? Do you have money to go out and date? Right. So I think that'd probably be a little chaotic. Hard to deal with.
Absolutely.
Submarines? No.
No, thank you. All right. Because we are recording this for our birthdays, which are in early February, I feel like I have to ask the Groundhog's Day question. You are stuck in a time loop trope romance.
Oh, God.
What is the event that keeps repeating and how do you eventually break it?
Oh, God. I feel so I could take this voice. I could take it into like, what is the most horrific event that keeps happening so that I have to like hook up with maybe someone else who's stuck in the time loop to break it because I'm like, oh my God, this is insane. And for me, that would be like being on a submarine, being on a cruise ship, being anywhere out in open water. If that was on loop, I'm like, I cannot. But I feel like what it would be more likely as a repeating event would be something like a bad first date. I'm horrible at dating. I
Really?
really am. I'm so bad at it. It makes me so uncomfortable. I don't date that often. Because it just I don't. It makes me so uncomfortable. So for me, the loop would probably be like doing like this first date over and over and over again, and I would be like, this is a disaster. But you could write it as like, oh, I'm slowly learning to get better every single time. Either I'm finding out something about them, and I put on a false front to appear more charming and lovely, and it gets better and better. Or I meet someone else during what could be a bad first date, and then I end up with them, and choosing the new person is what breaks the loop. Could be interesting. Or a little bit more feminist approach. What breaks the loop is me getting up and leaving the date because realizing it's not for me.
I love that.
Yeah. I feel like there's something around like a really bad, like a first date, because that would be like, again, other than open water, one of my worst nightmares is to kind of doing this awkward small talk.
Oh God.
Again. What would your time loop be?
What came to mind for me is a wedding where everything is going wrong.
Oh God.
And you're like in the bridal party. And so it's
not the bride or groom.
Yeah, you're not the bride or groom, but you're very close to whomever that person is. And it's up to you to fix the mistakes. But every time you fix a mistake, another mistake starts to happen. So you sort of have this like rolling problem solving thing going on. And if this were, a women's fiction, it could just be you're the maid of honor. And then, in your case, it could, similar to you, it could be you get up and walk out of it, or you make the drunk best man go to sleep and that way he can't cause more trouble, like you sort of like troubleshoot it and learn your own confidence. If it were a romance, you'd pick, the best friend's brother or the best man or someone like that. And like one or both of you could be aware of the time loop happening and be able to solve to work together in the time loop. We talked in
it's like Palm Springs, the Andy Samberg movie.
Yes. Maybe that's what I was thinking of there. But that idea of how do you fix things that are continuously compounding upon each other, and how do you change your own behavior to get there? There's a Christmas novel by Christina Lauren, probably 10 years old at this point, called In a Holidaze, where she keeps dying and then waking up and needing to revisit her family holiday until finally she makes it with the boy who got away, kind of thing. And she finally steps up and says, like, I have feelings for you. I've always had feelings for you beyond just childhood friends. So being able to have that confidence boost. But she slides off the road in the car when she won't talk to, like she goes down in a plane. Like there are some really shitty things that happen.
Russian Doll is another one. I didn't watch it, but that was like, but
I watched that one.
I actually thought of was like Stargate SG-1. Like I was a huge Stargate fan, and there is an episode where Richard Dean Anderson's character is the only one who knows they're stuck in a time loop. And it's on and on and on. And at first he's like, oh my God, what's happening? I need to fix it. Nobody believes him. And then ultimately he's able to do it. And Daniel Jackson's character, played by Michael Phelps, he's like, he's very, very smart. So they're working on like translating this alien language, but there's been so many loops that eventually Richard Dean Anderson's character is the one that starts translating it while Daniel just sits there and goes, oh, and he goes, we've done this a lot. And then like he has like some romantic tension with Samantha Carter. So there's one loop that right before it resets, he grabs her and like lays a huge kiss on her. He's going to remember it.
Yeah. May as well go for it.
Eventually he just starts fucking up. And there's a very famous gif from episode of him drawing like a face in ketchup and mustard on a plate, saying something along the lines of like, I'm going crazy. And like, that's the gif. So I kind of like the idea too of a time loop where eventually you just say, I'm going to take a couple time loops and just fuck it. Yes, fuck it. Which makes this episode of Stargate SG-1 kind of funny because they're at a military installation with like alien technology. So, military, like, you don't do this. And there's like a scene where he's like walking around in like shorts and a t-shirt or something like that. And they're like, Colonel, you're out of uniform. And he goes, don't care. And, off he goes. They're fun.
Okay, last question. Let's do our last question and then we can move on. Romance novel where they're rivals in the most mundane competition imaginable. I'm going to go first. I don't know if it's the best choice, but what came to mind for me is like the Olympics and sports where, we just talked to Alexa Martin last week about football and all these like sports rivalries that are going on. I would like to see a curling romance.
I was like, I'm sorry. Are you saying curling is like a mundane athletic activity?
We're like a lower, well-known activity.
Canada is rebelling at
okay,
this.
Fine. Bowling rivalry. Okay. I have read roller derby rivalries, which I really love, but I think sometimes these lesser known sports can be really fun. Not so much to get into the details of like, oh, you bowled an eagle, but like having those, or another one that came to mind for me as I'm talking about this is like 2 PTA presidents who have competing fundraisers. One's going to do a fun run and one's going to do a haunted house. And then they come together and end up doing a fun run haunted house. Like, I don't know. But I feel like there's something really interesting there about the small town rivalry of a fundraiser or something along those lines.
Interesting. Because I feel like I could go like, okay, if it was at a job, it could be something like, who gets the most sales, who signs up the most clients. It could be something like a fundraiser. I'm like, what's even more stupid, banal, and actually like very, very little impact? It makes me think of when you're in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts or whatever, and you have to get the badges. I was that person who wanted to get like every single badge, and I did.
Of course you did.
Every single badge. Of course I did. So I like whatever the adult version of I want to get all the badges. So maybe it's characters working at some type of corporation and they have to complete, Google's online training. You get, Google has certain programs you get certifications for. I'm good at G4A analytics. I'm good at whatever. And I feel like, well, I have more of these Google certificates than you because ultimately they don't mean anything.
They mean nothing.
They're not. Like, this is not a professional designation. It's like, oh, look, you completed an online course. But I would love for them to be in a competition over who gets like the most certifications that don't actually mean anything. Well, I have 7 from Google. Well, I was on Coursera and I got 12 certificates. Well, I got this additional certificate of completion from
I went through
University.
The whole Harvard Business School free courses. So that means I went to Harvard.
Exactly. I want them to compete in that way because it does not mean, it's not even something you would put on your resume, but I feel like this is my cachet.
I love that.
This is where I'm going with this. I think that'd be write all of these things that I'm coming up with because I will never write it.
There you go. Here, this is really just a brainstorming episode for all of us.
I love it. Everybody take these plot bunnies and go forth and frolic and write. This was a delightful birthday creative retrospective.
And moving forward, what plot ideas am I going to come out of this? You guys will suddenly see me writing more cage matches.
Back in my fanfic days, you would have things like ficlets, like mini fics that were, I think, under like 500 words, maybe. Was like what a ficlet was, and there'd be like a lot of these groups that would have like plot bunnies where they would think of these things, be like, great, go write a ficlet, and you had like 500 words to
love that.
Do something. Go forth, people, if anybody wants to participate in this so I can read them. Oh, that would be fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you so
tag
much.
us at First Dates and Soulmates on Instagram or on TikTok if you have written one of these booklets, so that way we can go read the fruits of your labor. Or if there
Mhm.
are books where we're like, oh my gosh, that time loop plot that you just talked about was this book,
Mhm.
like absolutely tag us, tell us about it. Come over to our Substack, you can support us there. Tell us what you would do for any of these questions, what your
Mhm.
mundane competition would be, what your grand gesture would be. We would love, love, love
What is your
to hear
cupcake
that from you.
flavor?
Yeah, definitely tell us your cupcake flavor. Nikki, what have you been shipping this week?
Warhammer 40K.
Okay.
So for those of you who are not familiar, Warhammer 40K, it is a game where you get figurines and you put them together and you paint them, and it's kind of got like a D&D element in that there's like dice rolls, there's rule books in terms of, oh, I have a Space Marine army and I roll at this and they can move at this and I deal blast damage, whatever. So my brother plays. He played when he was teen and he recently picked it up a couple years ago. And I was over at his house a couple weeks ago, and he's like, "You have to see this animation," because there was a guy on YouTube who self animated this like a couple minute long Space Marine fan film, and it was, and it liked it so much he got hired by Amazon Prime to do something for them, and then Amazon Prime released this video series. I can't remember the name of it. I'll link it in the show notes, but it's these like 10 to 20 minute long mini animation based on certain popular things. So there's one from Dungeons and Dragons, there's one from Warhammer, there's one from like really popular fighting games. So he and I just like sat and like watched these short films, and they were so fascinating. And I know a little bit of the game because I played it for so long. I think it's just really cool. But I started watching him play the Space Marine like, video game. The lore is fascinating. I was like, Chris, what's going on with this? He goes, okay, that's chaos. Okay, before I tell you about chaos, I got to tell you about like the emperor. The emperor is interred in the golden throne, and like on and on and on. So he actually gave me one of like the codex for the game that starts going through all the lore, and it talks about like the cult of the emperor and like the Space Marines. It's been 40,000 years of these things. So it's just been really kind of cool to dive into that lore a little bit more specifically because it is so fascinating. It's definitely one of those fan worlds. Actually, before that happened, there was this. Actually, before this, okay, well, you see that there were impurity seals. So yeah, these guys are like 20 feet tall and like on and on. So I'm definitely it's not a game I would ever play
But
because
you
I'm not.
love a good lore.
I also love like watching him like comment on like the stuff that I'm watching. So yeah, I'd say I this week I am shipping Warhammer 40K's associated lore, more specifically Space Marines, and I'm also excited because Henry Cavill is a huge Warhammer fan. And he has the rights to I think it's Warhammer 40K, and he's working to release like a series based on Warhammer 40K. So he's a huge nerd about it. It's really funny if you watch like him go on like Graham Nordengar and go on these other shows and talk Warhammer 40K and like his army and what he's built. Shout out to Henry Cavill for just being
For
beautiful, but
nerding
also
out and being
40K. Thank you.
beautiful.
Yes, exactly. Meg, what are you shipping this week?
I am shipping the Story Graph. So it is a Goodreads alternative. It is founded by a Black woman, which I appreciate. And it is a way of cataloging your reads for the year and getting new recommendations that is not owned by Amazon. So I know a lot of people who are making this shift over to Storygraph. I created an account last year when some of my readers for Peppermint Bark were like, I want to review your book, but I don't want to do it on Goodreads or Amazon. So, they created the page for me for Peppermint Bark so that way they could review it for me. And then I sort of went down this rabbit hole. I exported all of my library from Goodreads into Storygraph. And then it tells you things like, not only, here's how many books you read this year and here's how many pages they were, but it will break up for you. What were the genres that you like best? Who were the authors that you read the most of? What's the average page length? Not all in all, but it'll create a chart for you that's like 30% of your books were between 200 and 300 pages. And it sort of like is able to let you visualize your reading in a really fascinating way. So I still have everything set up. So if I read it on my Kindle, it'll go to my Goodreads and whatever. But really, I'm making a conscious choice this year to track my reading on the Story Graph instead. They have a lot of different challenges going on. You know, you and I have our bingo game that we're doing. And so there are other people who have created their own reading challenges that are hosted on the story graph. So I just saw one for books with trans main characters and LGBT plus supportive books, not just in the romance space, but you know, touching upon all of these different identities. And there's book recommendations coming out of that. And then you can mark it down in the story graph and use that as the space to hold for your challenge. So I'm exploring the functionality of that site, but I'm really loving the alternative to the Amazon owned property and the inclusiveness of the community as a site that is founded by a woman of color.
Oh, I love that. I've been seeing a lot about like Storygraph versus Goodreads. I don't really use Goodreads at all, so it's not something I've seen. But I've seen a lot of people talk about Storygraph and how cool it is. So
yeah, highly recommend. Come find me on it.
awesome.
And
yeah,
we'll
link,
connect on that
all
space.
those things in the show notes for you, along with every other thing we've talked about today. Thank you so much for joining us today for this, our birthday episode. Check us out on Substack, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Give us a rate, review, and subscribe. And check us out on social media. Coming up next week, we are talking about 9 Rules to Break when romance and a rake.
Happy birthday, Nikki!
Happy birthday, Meg.